They forced us to move our fence by 15 centimeters. What we did next made them regret it forever. What's the most small town, petty thing your family has ever done? Well, my family lived peacefully on our horse ranch for 2 decades without a single problem, until some strangers showed up and bought a narrow strip of land right behind our property. We thought everything was fine until a lawyer called my dad. He said that after a boundary survey, they'd discovered our back fence encroached on their land by 7 to 15 centimeters, depending on the spot along the line. These people had never even seen us in their lives, never introduced themselves. Our first conversation with them was that legal demand. My dad was a simple man, a man of his word. Firm, very kind, but also incredibly stubborn. He called them, organized a meeting, and tried to talk calmly. Do those damn centimeters really matter that much to you? Why didn't you just come talk to us first? He even offered them several solutions, but they were hostile from the start. They demanded he move the fence immediately or they would sue. Apparently, the law said they had to build their house a certain distance from the property line, and they wanted to push it as far back as possible, so they desperately needed those centimeters. I still remember when Dad came back from that meeting. He hung up his hat, shook his head, and told my mom with that calm of his, "Well, we got stuck with the neighbors nobody wants. They sued, and they won. We have to move the fence in 2 weeks." And I say we because I was the neighborhood's free labor, like every ranch kid in these situations. All that material, time, and effort was a heavy expense for the family, but we did it. Right at the start of spring is when the fun began. The new neighbors had started building in late winter and continued through spring, and the first weekend after they moved into their new house. I'll never forget that first weekend. They'd moved in on Friday afternoon with a silent, well-organized move. Labeled boxes, a big white van, and a bald guy who looked more like a CEO than a ranch neighbor. None of them waved hello. Not a single raised hand, nothing. On Saturday morning, Dad woke us up before sunrise. "Today we're working on the foal's corral," he said, pulling on his boots without looking at anyone. "And we're going to use everything that makes noise." Yeah, no further explanation was needed. Mom just sighed and said, "You're starting again, Ernesto." And he answered with that calm that was boiling inside him. "I just want to work in peace on my legal 15 centimeters." We got out the old air compressor we used for painting fences and started cleaning tools with it. The gasoline generator, which made more racket than a marching band, roared like crazy. My little brother was happily running his horse pony in circles right next to the fence. And as if that weren't enough, the dogs, who were usually asleep, decided that day to participate with an endless serenade. I was up to my eyebrows in whitewash, painting the corral posts when I saw them come out for the first time. There were 3 of them: the bald man, a blonde woman with dark sunglasses, and a girl about my age who seemed more interested in her phone than the ground she was walking on. They stood in their yard staring at us like we were crazy. The man approached the fence but didn't say anything, just watched us. Dad, with a new hat and a forced smile, greeted him. "Good morning, neighbor. Glad to see you're settled in. We start early every day around here, just so you know." The man just nodded and went back inside his house. 10 minutes later, a rural patrol car showed up. 2 officers we knew who were there more for the gossip than the law. "Everything in order, Don Ernesto?" one asked, getting out of the vehicle with a smile. "Of course, officer. Why do you ask?" "Well, the new neighbors say there's excessive noise since 5 a.m. Dad spread his arms. "We're working, all legal. The same thing I've been doing for 20 years. You want to see the ranch license?" The officer patted him on the shoulder. "No need, just came by to check in. Say hello to your wife." The police left laughing, and Dad muttered as we went back to work. They're in for a world of hurt if they think they can intimidate me. That day, while we were resting in the shade of the mesquite tree, I saw the neighbors installing thick curtains on their windows, even the kitchen ones. An invisible wall had already gone up between us, but Dad wasn't satisfied. That night, after dinner, he pulled out a notebook and a pencil. He sat in silence. My mom asked him, "What are you plotting now?" And he answered, "I want them to learn these names well. 2,000-watt LED floodlights. Dubala brand, ultra-sensitive motion sensor, galvanized, reinforced post. We're going shopping tomorrow. If they want a centimeter war, we'll give them centimeters with included light. He said it with his usual calm, no shouting, no drama. But I felt a chill. Mom closed her eyes like someone who already knows this won't end peacefully. What nobody expected was what happened the next morning. The motion sensor on the barn triggered by itself at 3:42 a.m. The lights turned on as if it were noon, and someone from the neighbor's side went running toward the woods. A figure, a shadow, an intruder. Dad went out with his lamp. I ran behind him. Mom shouted for us not to go, but he didn't hesitate. In the mud next to the wire fence were fresh boot prints. They weren't from any of us. This isn't just about noise anymore, Dad said, lowering his voice. Someone tried to cross onto our property last night. Nobody ate breakfast in peace that morning. Mom couldn't stop looking out the window while she heated the coffee, and Dad didn't touch his plate of beans. He just sat with his elbows on the table, hands clasped, staring into nothing as if he were solving an impossible math problem. I, on the other hand, couldn't get the silhouette we saw running in the early hours out of my head because I saw it. It was real, not an illusion or an animal. And what unsettled me most was that it crossed onto our land from the neighbor's side. "Are you sure it wasn't some drunk from town?" Mom asked. Dad shook his head. "No, those boots aren't from town, and nobody comes through there without knowing the land." He walked like he knew where he was going. We went out later to check the entire property line. The new fence was still intact. Of course, they wouldn't dare damage it so soon after moving in. But behind the old little chicken coop we hardly used, Dad found something that changed the tone of the day. A camera. It wasn't ours. It was hidden behind a pile of rocks pointed toward our stable. It was small, black, barely visible, but it was there with a small, off red light, camouflaged. Dad unscrewed it silently like someone removing a splinter from their heel without making a fuss. Mom, seeing it in his hands, crossed herself. "And now, what does that mean?" "It means," Dad said, "this is no longer a land dispute. It's illegal surveillance, it's invasion, it's distrust. And if they don't trust us, well, now we don't trust them either." He put the camera in a Ziploc bag and stored it in the back of the closet. We weren't going to file a report, at least not yet. My dad wasn't one to call the police every 5 minutes. He was the type who preferred to handle things with intelligence and patience. But something in him changed that day. He started walking around the ranch as if every step were part of a strategy. He ordered the main gate reinforced, all the locks checked, and had a bigger spotlight brought from Monterey because the ones from town aren't good enough for this anymore. That same day, in the afternoon, Dad gathered us all outside near the old water trough. "We're going to build a tower," he said. "A tower?" my brother asked, not understanding. "Yes, right here on the boundary. We'll put up some planks, reinforce the floor, put in a chair and a tarp. It's going to be our watchtower. From there, we'll watch the fence and whatever lies beyond." Mom scoffed. "What are we now, Border Patrol?" Dad smiled, his eyes squinting. "No, woman. We are the owners of this ranch, and we're going to defend it with elegance and height." And as if it were a school project, we began to build an improvised but sturdy structure from recycled wood, iron posts, and a hand-painted corrugated metal roof. The tower grew fast. In 2 days, it was standing, looking directly at the neighbor's house. When they finished it, Dad christened it the Fortress of the 15 Centimeters. The most ironic part? It wasn't illegal. It was built on our land. No invasion, no violations. Just pure malice and style. From that tower, I would sit with my binoculars and a notebook, writing down everything that happened on the other side. Not out of paranoia, but strategy. Because something told me this was just beginning, and I wasn't wrong. One night, while I was writing in my notebook from the tower, I saw a scene I still struggle to recount without anger. The neighbor's daughter, the one with the dark sunglasses who was always in a bad mood, approached the fence and threw something over to our side. It was small, black, looked like a jar. I ran to where it fell. It was a glass jar without a lid, filled with a thick yellow liquid. And the smell. My God, the smell wasn't gasoline. It wasn't insecticide, it was human urine. And next to the jar, a crumpled note. This is what your ranch smells like. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from indignation. And when Dad read the note, he didn't say a single word. He just stored it in the same closet where he'd put the camera. Then he looked at me with those calm eyes and said, "We're going to respond, but not with shouts or insults. We'll do it our way, and they will regret every centimeter." After that night with the jar, the ranch was never the same. We didn't say it out loud, but we all knew we'd crossed an invisible line. What was once a conflict over square meters had transformed into something personal, humiliating, and silently dangerous. Dad, as always, didn't react with shouts. His thing was more twisted, more elaborate. The next day, he asked me to go with him to the town hardware store. He bought treated wood, screws, a thick black tarp, and a new set of Twilight Vision binoculars. He said it like it was normal. He also brought a long ladder and an old swivel chair he borrowed from Don Kema, the mechanic. We came back, and he spent the whole day reinforcing the tower. But this time, it wasn't just about watching. There was something in his manner, a meticulous, almost obsessive detail. "Dad," I asked while he tightened some screws, "why don't we just give them back their jar? Or better yet, why don't we call the police?" He stopped, looked toward the neighbor's house, the curtains were closed as always, and answered in a low voice, "Because if we play their game, we've already lost. I don't want my grandkids to say one day, 'Grandpa let himself be humiliated and did nothing.'" The night came with silence. For the first time, no dog barked, no horse whinnied. There was a tense calm in the air, as if the ranch were holding its breath. And then it happened. Around 11 p.m., while everyone was asleep and I was peeking from my room, I saw Dad go up to the tower alone. He carried a flashlight, a blanket, and a steaming mug. He set up like it was his throne. He didn't come down until dawn. The next morning, without a word, he hung a huge sign on the tower that said, "Sorrento Lookout, Panoramic View of Hypocrisy." I laughed, I admit it. Mom almost broke his head with a broom, but Dad was calmer than ever. And the neighbors, well, that's when they started to crack. First came the shouts. Late at night, when they thought no one was listening, the daughter yelling at her father for bringing them to this place full of filthy people, and the wife screaming that she wanted to go back to Guadalajara. Then came the black curtains on the second-floor windows, covering even the balconies. They were isolating themselves. They didn't know how to react, and that was exactly what Dad wanted, to destabilize them without laying a finger on them. One afternoon, while my brother was fixing the chicken coop gate, the neighbor, the bald one, finally approached the fence. He had an expression of both rage and exhaustion. I stood a few meters away, just listening. "What do you want with all this?" he asked Dad, who was nailing some wood without looking up. "I already got what I wanted. You got yours too. Everyone has their land, their fence, their meters. What's the problem?" "You're provoking." "Provoking?" Dad finally lifted his head. "No, sir, I'm redecorating my ranch." The man was speechless. He left without another word. That same night, something happened that none of us expected. My brother heard a strange noise near the old chicken coop, like a buzzing. When Dad went out with his lamp, we found it. A drone was hovering right over our property with a camera on. It was one of those modern ones with 4 propellers, blinking lights, and it was recording. Dad took his shotgun. He didn't shoot it. He wasn't stupid. He just slowly aimed at the sky and held it steady until the drone retreated and disappeared into the darkness. But the message was clear. Mom, seeing us return, trembling with anger, approached with a hoarse voice. "This has gone too far, Ernesto. Today it was a drone. Tomorrow what? Are they going to come over armed?" Dad put the shotgun away without a word, but that early morning, without anyone seeing, he installed motion sensors with audible alarms and high-power spotlights all around the perimeter. And at dawn, while the roosters were crowing, the neighbors found something new in front of their house. A hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Here begin the most expensive 15 centimeters of your life." I swear to God, I never saw Mom smile with such pleasure as she did that morning. But just when we thought the ranch couldn't surprise us anymore, the mailman arrived with an official letter in a white envelope sealed with a municipal stamp. It was a notification. The neighboring family had requested an environmental inspection of the ranch, citing persistent bad odors, nuisance noise, and sanitary risk factors. Dad, with the envelope in his hand, just said, "Ah, now they want to get serious. Well, let them come, but let them come wearing boots." The inspector arrived on a Wednesday around mid-morning. He wasn't from around here. You could tell from the moment he got out of his car. Pressed beige suit, loafers that were already full of dirt before his second step, and a tablet in his hand that he held like it was a weapon. "Good morning, Don Ernesto," he said, adjusting glasses that didn't fit well. Dad wiped his dirt-covered hands on his pants and approached with his usual smile. "The one and only. How can I help you?" "I'm here regarding a request filed with the municipality. Environmental review. Noise, odors, sanitary conditions. Just a standard procedure." "Ah, of course. Standard." Dad looked toward the neighbor's house without hiding his irony. "Come in. We have nothing to hide here." Mom sent the three of us, me, my brother, and the youngest, to follow him discreetly in case he needed help, but we knew it was also to observe because every step that guy took was a performance. "This stable is cleaned how often?" "3 times a week. Use your nose if you want." "These animals have all their vaccinations?" "Of course, here are the records signed by the municipal vet." "That chicken coop is active?" "Only with the oldest hens. They're retired like politicians. They don't lay anything, but they eat just the same." The inspector didn't seem to find anything. He took photos, nodded, wrote something on his tablet. Then came the tensest part, the sounds. "And this equipment?" he said, pointing to the generators and the compressor. "Tools of the trade, sir. If you don't like the noise of the country, buy a condo." That's when the inspector changed his tone. He got serious, closed his tablet, looked Dad in the eye and said, "Look, Don Ernesto, between you and me, I've done 5 visits like this week, all on rural land, all from complaints by new neighbors who can't stand the life they chose. All I want is to get out of here without getting my shoes dirty." Dad laughed. I did too. It was the first time someone from the government spoke with such bluntness and so much sense. "So tell me, Mr. Inspector," Dad said, "do you see anything here that should worry us?" The man put his tablet in his backpack, looked toward the fields, and replied, "The only thing that worries me is that there are people who buy land next to a ranch and then complain about the smell of cows." And with that, he left. That night was different, more relaxed, as if we'd won a small battle without having to fight. But it didn't last long. The next morning, when I opened the front door, I got a surprise. A dog, but not one of ours. It was big, shaggy, one of those that looks like a cross between a German shepherd and a demon, and it was loose inside our property. We didn't know it. It had no collar. And when we tried to approach, it growled. Dad approached it calmly with a lasso. The dog didn't move, just stared at him with an eerie intensity. He managed to rope it and took it to the corral, telling us, "This isn't normal. This dog isn't from around here." They let it loose knowing we have kids. We took it to the vet. They checked it. No chip, no owner, no vaccinations. It was a stray, probably trained to fight. Most likely someone had let it loose on purpose, and we all knew who had a motive. Dad wanted to release it into the woods, but Mom wouldn't let him. "No," she said while preparing water and food. "Whoever comes to do harm can stay and learn how to live in peace." So we adopted him. We named him Centimeters. Centimeters, as if he understood everything. He became the guardian of the ranch. He stayed at the entrance, slept by the tower. And when someone approached the fence, he barked as if he knew their entire history. One day, we even saw the neighbor's daughter try to approach. It was just as Centimeters stood up and gave her such a fierce look that she backed away without a word. It seemed like we had regained control, that everything was stable. Until one afternoon, while Dad was fixing the chicken coop roof, we heard a scream. It was my younger brother. We ran to the corral. He was pale, pointing at the ground with a trembling hand. And there, in the dirt churned up by the horses, was a shiny, dirty object. A knife? It wasn't ours. It had engraved initials that none of us recognized, and it was buried right under the tower. Dad picked it up, wiped it with a rag, and without a word, put it in the same closet where the camera, the jar, and the note already slept. That night, as the spotlights turned on and centimeters stood guard, Dad told us something I still remember word for word. They tried to scare us, and now they're watching us. But if they think we're going to give in, they're more lost than their 15 centimeters. What we didn't know was that the next day, a group of city kids would come to the ranch on a school trip, and that was going to change everything. On Thursday morning, Mom already had the tortillas on the griddle when the horn of a school bus sounded. We weren't expecting visitors, so we all looked out as if the bus had come to arrest us. About 25 kids filed out wearing paper hats, colorful backpacks, and a short, nervous teacher who was trying to maintain order while reading her phone. They had cameras, notebooks, and that energy only city kids have when they step on real dirt for the first time. "Is this the Los Encinos Ranch?" the teacher shouted over the noise. Dad wiped his sweat with his handkerchief, smiled with his usual calm, and said, "Yes, ma'am, come in. Welcome to the land of the most expensive 15 centimeters in Mexico." Mom shot him a warning look. "Ano, please." Turns out the teacher had called weeks earlier when spring was just beginning, asking if we still offered school visits like we used 2 years ago. Dad had completely forgotten, but he didn't back down. He wasn't one to deny anyone hospitality, least of all children. The teacher explained they were from Monterey, from a private elementary school, and they wanted the kids to learn about rural life, animals, crops, honest work. What they didn't know was that they were also going to learn about passive warfare. From the moment the kids got off, the ranch was filled with laughter, running, shouts, and songs. They rode the horses, painted rocks, fed the goats. One girl asked if the cows gave chocolate milk, and my brother laughed so hard he almost fell into the well. Dad organized a bonfire. Mom cooked tamales. I showed them how to make fresh cheese. Centimeters became the main attraction. They took pictures of him like he was a movie star. But the best and worst part was when the kids discovered the tower. "Can we go up there?" one asked excitedly. "It's a castle." Dad hesitated for just a second. "Yes, it's a castle, the castle of the frontier." And one by one the kids went up. From there, they could see the fields, the mountains, and, of course, the neighbor's house. The teacher took a group photo, everyone smiling with the tower in the background, the sun setting behind it. It was then that we saw them, the neighbors standing in their yard with their arms crossed, watching the whole spectacle as if a circus were passing through their living room. The bald man, his lemon-sucking-faced blonde wife, and the daughter who wouldn't let go of her phone even to breathe. Dad approached the fence with a tray of tamales. "Neighbors, care to join us? The ranch is a school today. It's free, tasting included." They didn't respond. They just turned around. And it was that same afternoon as the bus was leaving that something happened that changed the tone of the day. One of the girls, as she was getting on, shouted, "Teacher, look! They're taking pictures of us." We all turned. The neighbor's daughter from the second-floor terrace was aiming her phone directly at the children. Without permission. Shameless. The teacher got off the bus like a fury. "Ma'am, sir, are you authorizing that girl to photograph minors?" The neighbor's wife came out to defend her. "It's her house. She can take pictures of whatever she wants." "Not when there are minors present. This is illegal." I already had my phone out, recording everything, because we knew by then that anything could be used later. Dad looked at me and just said, "Record it well. Make sure you get the audio." The argument escalated. The teacher threatened to file a report. The neighbors screamed that it was their property, their balcony, their right. We, meanwhile, remained silent, watching, recording, waiting. When the school bus left, Mom broke the silence with a phrase I'll never forget. "They're not fighting us anymore. They're fighting what we represent. And that's going to hurt them more." That night, Dad went up to the tower and hung a new banner. In large white letters, painted with a thick brush, it said, "Here we educate. Over there they spy." It didn't take an hour before we heard a door slam from the neighbor's side. And the very next morning, Dad found a letter nailed to the fence with a kitchen knife. It was a direct threat, a folded paper with irregular, hasty handwriting. Stop, or someone will get hurt. We're not asking. Dad read it without expression. Mom covered her mouth. I felt a knot in my throat. But Dad just said, now the game is over. The nice gestures are finished. We're going to make them regret seeing us as fools. And what he did the next day was so unexpected, so bold, that even Centimeters was left with his mouth open. The morning dawned with the smell of damp earth and firewood, but there was no coffee that morning. Nobody said it, but we all knew it wasn't a day like any other. After the letter nailed to the fence with a direct threat, Dad didn't sleep. He stayed in the tower all night without moving, with Centimeters lying at his feet like a loyal soldier. When he came down at dawn, his eyes were red and his voice hoarse. He gathered us all in the kitchen, even the youngest, who barely understood half of what was happening. Today, he said, we're going to build a wall. Mom dropped a spoon in the sink. A wall? Yes, a tall wall. Legal, well-built, but on their side, where it will bother them most. And with what money, Ernesto? Are you going to sell the cows? Don't need to. We'll use what we have. Bamboo, old wood, metal sheets, compacted earth, everything we've been saving up over the years. It won't be pretty, but it will be solid. And ugly on the side, it needs to be ugly. And so began one of the most intense days of my life. We moved materials, shovels, wheelbarrows. We called 2 cousins who lived in another ejido, communal land, experts in rural construction. Within hours, the property was full of activity, and it didn't take long for the neighbors to appear at their windows. First they watched with curiosity, then with rage. And when they saw the wall beginning to rise right in front of their kitchen, blocking the view they were so proud of, they understood this was no longer about jokes or hints or provocations. This was a declaration of visual war. The wall grew fast, 3 meters high, wide base, reinforced with mud and wire. On our side, Dad had them paint figures of flowers, horses, words like peace and roots. On their side, all that was left was a rough, rugged, gray, misshapen wall. We worked a whole afternoon under the sun, without rest, only pausing when Mom brought hibiscus water and bread with cheese, then back to work. Everyone on the ranch, even the youngest, knew this wasn't just a wall, it was an answer. Mid-construction, we heard footsteps from the other side. The bald neighbor appeared again, with a cap and a folder in his hand. He approached the fence with a fake smile that barely hid the venom in his voice. Don Ernesto, what are you doing? Dad didn't turn around. Building on my land. Any problem? Look, I don't want to think this is an attempt at harassment. You know there are laws. Dad put down the hammer, wiped it with a rag, and approached the fence. He put his hands on the wood and answered in a low, clear voice, like thunder that doesn't need to shout. You crossed a line when you left trash on my land, when you spied on my animals, when you took pictures of minors without permission. You broke the human deal. Now you endure. The neighbor tried to stay calm. His left eyelid was twitching. This won't end here, he said through his teeth. Dad smiled at him. I hope not, because what comes next is even better. And yes, what followed wasn't just better, it was legendary. The next morning, the wall was finished. Dad placed a wooden plaque with hand-carved letters right in the center of the side, facing the neighbor's house. We were all witnesses to the moment. The plaque read, "Here ends your arrogance." Nobody said anything for a few seconds. All you could hear was the wind, the chickens squawking, and Centimeters barking somewhere on the ranch. But then the neighbor's daughter appeared. She came out furiously into the yard, screamed something we couldn't understand, threw a stone that just bounced on the ground and went back inside, slamming the door. And there we thought it was all done. Until that night, my little brother came running from the yard, pale as paper. Dad! Something's glowing in the tower. There's a light on. We all went out, rushed up. Centimeters was barking like crazy, And yes, there was a light on, but it wasn't ours. On the floor of the tower, right in the center, was a lit flashlight pointing upward. Someone had been inside. Someone had been there in the heart of the ranch, without any of us noticing. And worst of all, they'd left a note. A folded sheet written in the same crooked handwriting as the previous threat. If you think a wall will protect you, wait for what's coming. Dad didn't say anything. He just bent down, turned off the flashlight, and looked toward the woods with eyes full of a mute rage I had never seen in him before. Mom covered her mouth. My brother hugged centimeters. And I felt that fear had finally arrived for us. From that night on, the ranch was no longer a home. It became a fortress, a barracks, a place where we slept with one eye open and our souls tied to fear. Because when someone enters your watchtower unseen, it's no longer just a conflict. It's a direct threat to your home, your people, your name. Dad, without a word, the next day sent for Tomas, an old friend of his who had worked in private security in Monterey. He arrived in black boots, a tactical backpack, and with a gaze not accustomed to the countryside. His nickname was the Jackal. Don't ask why. "Where are the vulnerable entry points?" was the first thing he asked, before even greeting Mom. For 3 days, Tomas inspected the ranch as if it were enemy territory. He checked trees, ditches, fences, blind spots. He organized us into watch shifts. He installed new sensors, this time with audible alarms, changed the locks, plugged holes. Then came his final suggestion. You'll have to move the livestock. If someone comes for you, it won't be for the land, it will be for what you have that's alive. Mom crossed herself. Do you really think they want to hurt us? Really? The jackal didn't answer. He just lit a cigarette, put it in his mouth, and kept walking. I looked at him and thought, when did we go from being a rural family to living like we're at war? It was then that Dad made a decision that broke everyone inside. He sent the horses away from the ranch. They're going to Don Julian's in San Ignacio. They'll be safe there. Safe from what, Dad? I asked, feeling myself break. From a madman with a flashlight? Safe from everything we can't see. Because when someone enters your tower and doesn't steal anything, they're not looking to steal. They're looking to send a message. And I won't risk my animals for a message. The livestock truck arrived on Friday morning. We loaded the horses one by one. The foal we'd raised since birth cried like a child when they loaded him. I cried too, but silently like Mom. And while this was happening, the neighbors came out onto their balcony, all 3 of them, watching as if they were seeing a parade they hadn't asked for. The daughter had a strange expression. Not anger, not mockery, something colder, emptier, as if she were no longer seeing a fight, but a victory. When the truck left, Dad stood watching the rising dust and said, "Now the nonsense is truly over. Let them get ready." And they got ready, but not as we expected, because 2 days later, in the middle of the afternoon, when the sun was highest and the wind carried the smell of the stable toward the road, a health officer arrived at the ranch. This time he wasn't alone. He brought 2 more inspectors with cameras, folders, and an audit attitude. "Don Ernesto, we have a formal anonymous complaint. Sanitary risk due to accumulation of organic waste and soil contamination with animal waste." Dad crossed his arms. "And who says that?" "It's anonymous, sir, but it obliges us to inspect." And they did. They recorded, measured the soil's pH, checked the manure piles, took pictures of the wall, the tower, the goats. Everything. As if we were on trial, as if someone were building a case against us. "This is ridiculous," Mom said. "Manure has been used here since Mexico was Mexico." One of the inspectors muttered something like, "We know, ma'am, but the rules change when there are subdivisions nearby." And there we understood everything. The neighbors didn't just want to annoy us, they wanted to expel us, turn us into the inconvenient ones, the dirty ones, the aggressive ones. They wanted to make us look like the savages of the ranch. But Dad wasn't one to leave easily. That same night, after a silent meeting under the mesquite tree, he made a decision. "We're going to respond, but we'll do it with a party." "A party?" I asked. In the middle of all this, Dad stood up, looked at the tower, then at the wall, then at the neighbor's house. Yes, because if they want us to look like scum, then we're going to show them what community is, what living land is, what joy with feet full of mud is. We're going to bring everyone we've helped, everyone who owes us favors, everyone who respects the ranch. We're going to fill this place with music, barbecue, boots, and hats. And when they see we're not alone, maybe they'll start to feel the emptiness on their side. And so began the organization of the biggest party the ranch had seen since my grandparents' wedding. A party that was going to be more than an event, it was going to be a declaration of existence. What we didn't know was that that same night, while we were making the first calls, someone was digging something on the other side of the fence. A pit. A hole. And it wasn't for planting trees. I'd never in my life seen my dad so immersed in something as he was with that party. He had lists, calls, names, written in an old notebook with a broken cover, divided into groups. Family, friends, suppliers, loyal neighbors, the Ajido folks, the musicians. He titled the page, "Those Who Know Us." We're going to fill this place up to the woods. If they want us alone, they'll see we're more accompanied than ever. Mom doubted at first. What if they take it as a provocation? Dad responded without thinking. Then let them be provoked, because we're not going to hide the life we have because of people who won't even say hello. In 3 days, the ranch became another world. We hung colored lights between the mesquites. We set up long planks as communal tables. We installed speakers under the tower and even hired a giant banner that said, Los Encinos Ranch, open doors, clean souls. The response was overwhelming. People came from all over. Cousins from Allende, uncles from Linares, old friends from Sabinas Hidalgo, even a group of cowboys from San Pedro with hats that shone like mirrors. There was barbecue, beans in a pot, handmade tortillas, cold beer, artisanal mezcal. Kids ran around with centimeters as if he were the town mascot. Nobody asked about the conflict. Nobody needed to know. Everyone knew who we were. The musicians arrived at 5. Norteño music, classic, trumpet, accordion, bajo sexto. The first notes were like an explosion of fresh air. Dad walked among the guests like a general on parade. He smiled, greeted, hugged. And then, around 7, happened what we all knew would happen. The neighbors came out. First, the wife standing on the balcony with a funeral face, looking at the illuminated ranch as if it were a divine offense. Then the daughter with phone in hand, recording in vertical mode, like someone gathering evidence for an imaginary trial. But the one who impacted me the most was the father. He came out into the yard, crossed his arms, and said nothing. Just stared fixedly as if he could turn off the music with his eyes. It was at that moment the musicians changed rhythm. A fast song came on, one of those that wake up your feet. Dad raised his hat, made a sign, and the guests shouted in unison. It was glorious. But it didn't last long because at 8, one of the ranch kids came running from the back of the property, pale with his mouth open. Don Ernesto, they're coming in from the other side. They're digging. We ran, flashlights in hand. We skirted the wall until we reached an area where the grass was disturbed, and there it was, a deep, recent hole. It couldn't have been more than an hour old. Someone had tried to dig under the wall. Dad knelt, put his hand in, touched the damp earth, and pulled something out, a sealed glass jar. But this time it wasn't urine, it was gasoline, and with it a short, poorly coiled fuse inside the jar. A homemade bomb, said the jackal, who appeared behind us as if we'd summoned him. Are you sure? I asked with a knot in my stomach. Very sure. This is a warning, but it's also a mistake. Dad looked at him. Why a mistake? Because now there's finally enough to get them expelled. They've finally put the rope around their own necks. We called the rural police. They arrived 2 hours later. They took pictures, took the jar, filed a report, promised to investigate. But we all knew that in this country, justice sometimes arrives on a donkey. That night, the party ended early, not because we wanted to, but because the atmosphere had changed. It felt weird to celebrate when someone had tried to set your house on fire. Dad stayed alone in the tower until 3 a.m., and when he returned, he had a toolbox and a folded sheet in his hand. What's that, Dad? The next phase. He opened the box and pulled out a red bulb, a small siren, and a solar panel. Tomorrow there will be an alarm here. And as he walked away toward the tower to install it, I read the sheet he'd left on the table. It was a printout, a Google Maps page with coordinates marked, a new plot of land for sale right behind the neighbor's property. Dad, is this what I think it is? He just smiled. We're expanding. If they don't leave, we're going to surround them. 3 days after the party, everything seemed calm. Too calm. Nobody peered out from the neighbor's side. The house remained with the curtains closed, the lights off. Not even the dog that used to bark appeared. It was as if they had disappeared or were waiting for something. Dad, on the other hand, didn't wait. For him, the battle had changed terrain. Now it wasn't about resisting, it was about expanding. This ranch has withstood droughts, storms, and governments worse than these neighbors, but never, never have they made us back down. And you know why? He said one night around the bonfire with a mezcal in his hand. Because we know when to move from anger to action. The land for sale right behind the neighbor's property had belonged to a distant cousin who'd gone to the States years ago. Nobody had touched it since. High weeds, dry trees, hard land, but legally it was a jewel. Dad made some calls. The deal was closed in a week. When Mom signed as a witness, her hand was shaking. Ernesto, are you sure? This isn't just a purchase, it's a provocation. No, woman, this is a warning. If they don't respect boundaries, we're going to redraw the map. And so he did. With the deed still warm, Dad had the land cleared. Machetes, tractors, a couple of laborers who owed old favors arrived. In 4 days, the land was cleared, and right on the edge closest to the neighbor's house, he built something new. A small wall, low, barely 1.5 meters high, but with a wooden gate and a hand-painted sign that said, "Entrance to the expanded ranch. Here, too, we breathe freedom." And as if that weren't enough, he put a picnic table, a sun umbrella, and a couple of lounge chairs with a direct view into the neighbor's backyard. There, the real psychological war began. Every afternoon, Dad would sit there with his hat, his coffee, and a notebook, saying nothing, just watching, observing as if waiting for a storm. It didn't take long for it to explode. One night we were having dinner when we heard a truck skid on the dirt road. We all went out. It was the neighbor. He got out furious, eyes bulging. He approached the new entrance. "This is harassment. This is illegal. You people are obsessed." Dad walked toward him with his usual calm. "Neighbor, this is private property. Deeded, legal. And if you want to accuse me of observing, don't forget your daughter was the first to take pictures without permission. My family doesn't feel safe with you next door." "Mine doesn't either. But instead of running away, we bought more land." There, the neighbor lost control. "What do you want? What do you gain from this?" Dad answered without raising his voice. "For you to leave. But if you don't, at least learn to live surrounded by people who aren't afraid of you." The man turned around, got in his truck, and left, but not without leaving a cloud of dust behind him. That night, for the first time, Dad asked that we all sleep inside the house. He closed windows, turned off lights, and put centimeters at the front door. "This isn't over," he said in a low voice. "This is just about to blow." And he was right, because the next morning, while I was making coffee, I saw something hanging on the front door. An envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet, a photocopy of a lawsuit. Formal accusation of harassment, visual invasion, and psychological harm to a minor. Their daughter, they were suing us. Dad read the entire sheet and then, instead of tearing it up, he laughed. "Now," he said, putting the paper down on the table. "Now they're scared." "And what are we going to do?" I asked. He poured himself some coffee, took a sip. Then he looked at me with that tempered steel gaze. "We're going to organize a wedding." "A wedding?" "Yes, your sister's wedding. Right here on the ranch, with everyone invited, and we're going to do it right in front of them so they know that while they fill out paperwork, we fill our lives." But Dad, my sister doesn't even have a boyfriend. Dad smiled. He stood up, took his hat, and said, "Well, she'd better get one because the wedding is on." And yes, the wedding was on, though we didn't know that on that day, one of the neighbor's dirtiest secrets would come to light. The wedding announcement was so unexpected that even my sister choked on the tortilla she was eating. "What did you say, Dad? I'm getting married here on the ranch?" "We're going to fill it with flowers, music, and decent people. And we're going to do it in front of those who thought they could steal our peace. We're going to show them who we are, a family that gets up even when they try to sink our roots." "And with whom, Dad?" "With whoever you find." My sister was somewhere between nervous and mocking, but Mom knew him well. She told her quietly while clearing the plates, "Find someone worthwhile because if your father has already visualized it, it's going to happen, and it's going to be beautiful." 2 weeks passed. The wedding took shape. Dad got a rural justice of the peace. Mom cooked nonstop. All the cousins confirmed. My sister, against all odds, showed up one day with a bearded guy, a cowboy from a neighboring ranch, quieter than a cactus but with a firm gaze. Dad studied him in silence. After a few seconds, he offered his hand. "You will respect my daughter until death, sir. Then welcome to this madness." The wedding was in 6 days, and so, under that orange July sky, the ranch began its final transformation. Flowers everywhere, ribbons hanging from the trees, a rustic altar in front of the wall, and the tower decorated with white and red ribbons, converted into a nuptial balcony. Dad put a sign on it that said, "Here true love begins, right where your limits end." The day arrived. People everywhere. Cars parked all the way to the woods. Mariachi music, dresses, hats, children running. Everyone who had been with us through the troubles was there. It was a celebration, yes, but also a public declaration. The neighbors knew it, and as expected, all three came out. But this time, they didn't just stand and watch. They came walking toward the fence. The man in front, the wife behind him, rigid, the daughter recording with her phone as always. And then the unthinkable happened. While we were all busy with the ceremony, the daughter climbed a portable ladder and tried to record from on top of the wall. One of the cousins saw her, yelled, "Get down from there, brat!" But it was too late. The ladder wobbled. She lost her balance. She fell backward onto her own property with a sharp scream that cut through the music. Silence. Then crying. Mom ran to get the nurse from town. Dad kept everyone still, firm, without losing composure. "Nobody crosses that fence. It's their house. Let them deal with it." The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. They took her away, and then everything exploded. That night, the municipal judge came to the ranch with a summons, but not for us. It was for the neighbors. Someone, nobody ever found out who, had delivered a USB drive. It contained recordings, photos from the tower, drone videos, audio of threats. Real evidence. The judge just said, "The circus ends here. This family has been under pressure and illegal surveillance. And you?" He looked at the bald man with ice-cold eyes. "Have a lot to explain." A week later, the neighbors abandoned the house silently in the early morning. The moving trucks came at 4 a.m. They didn't even say goodbye. They just left an empty property, no trace of them, and with their reputation in tatters. The rumor about the USB spread through all the ejidos. Nobody wanted to buy their property for months. They called it the house that tried to silence a ranch. Dad, with his usual calm, didn't throw a party. He just had one last wooden plaque made and hung it next to the main gate of the ranch, carved with care and pride. "Here end the threats. Here begins the memory." What happened to each of us? Dad, Ernesto, returned to his routine, but he was not the same. More reserved, wiser. The tower remains his sacred place. Every afternoon he sits there with his coffee, not to watch, but to remember that respect is not negotiated. Mom got her smile back. She opened a small rural cooking workshop on the ranch. She teaches children and tourists how to make tamales and cheese. She says all that chaos taught her that dignity is not cooked in silence. My sister and her husband stayed to live on the ranch. He built a small stable and she opened a social media account where she shares rural life. Ironically, now she's the one who records everything, but with respect. My younger brother became more protective. He now trains centimeters and dreams of being a veterinarian. He says that one day he'll buy the land where the neighbors lived himself, just to plant trees. I'm still here, writing this. Because if I learned anything, it's that some wars aren't won with strength. They are won with memory, with family, and with every centimeter you refuse to lose.